Welcome everybody to State of the Nation. We're really excited to be here with you all today. We are 8 poet laureates from different spaces and communities across the country, from towns and cities to counties to states. And what we all have in common is that this last year, we were all recipients of the Academy of American Poets Poet Laureate Fellowship with the Andrew Mellon Foundation, which invested and invests every year over $1 million in communities across the country through poets who hold this honorary position of poet laureate. And people always ask me, how do you get to be a poet laureate? And it's different in every community. In my case, the answer was you apply. And then you have long conversations over years of not getting it about why you didn't get it. And then eventually, you work your way into doing it. But it's this interesting role, and it's something I think that has become much more known and much more talked about and widespread since Amanda Gorman's inauguration poem for Joe Biden. And there was a huge surfeit of communities creating poet laureate positions back in the 1970s. And then just in the last decade, it's happened again. And there are all of these communities now creating adult poet laureate positions, creating youth poet laureate positions, and really seeing a place for poets and for poetry, for these storytellers and keepers of the literary bent of the culture in local government and as community organizers. So I'm really honored to be joined today by these poets who are in their own right incredible as literary figures, but also incredible as people who are really shepherding their communities and helping people to access the arts and to access literature. I saw a statistic this last week researching literacy that something like 60% of adults in the US read at a 6th grade level or below. And so really thinking about the work that we're doing as important work, both with schools, but also with adult populations, and helping people express themselves and helping people communicate. And so without further ado, each of the poets today is going to share one of their pieces. And if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves, your name, and also the place that you're representing and coming to us. And thank you all those who are staying up late on the East Coast to be here. We're each going to share a poem, and then we're going to have a little bit of a discussion about poetry in communities and about what we've seen and what we've learned as representatives of our communities over the last year through this fellowship. Then we're going to close us out with a poem, and finally with a game that we played, creating a video poem across 13 different states, counties, and cities. That's the agenda for today. So to kick things off, I am so excited to pass things over to Samaj Brown.
Greetings. As Brian said, I am Samaj Brown. I'm poet laureate for Flint, Michigan. I'll be reading part 1 of the poem, Where Am I From? Where am I from? I am from the blood river of twisted carcass. I am from Fire River, where the strike of friction against rock of flint smokes tongues of resistance. Lead burning brains and bodies of the resilient, beautiful. I am Flint, Midwest bioregion, where nuclear orange canary alerts the world. Meet me where the water shed into bay of being, fed by underground railroad tributaries, escaping the river killers. Where am I from? I am from the conflagration, the big fire, incinerating the revolving rotisserie globe. They have savaged our bodies and our land. I burn for you. our Brianna. Oh, our Brianna, radiating volcanic social convulsions of African ash. I am from a regurgitating country, trying to grow a conscience in a petri dish, wheezing in the chemical crucible of casual killings as the tide of plastic rushes our veins. Where am I from? Do you not hear the eulogy of rainforest choirs? Do you not hear the silence of extinction? I am from this earth is my body. I am from my lungs are a species. I am from that sacrament, dissimilar to any ever tasted the milk of, newer forever more than eternity the breath of. We, the humble crawlers of light, magma, our authority, lava, our power, and shout this earth forward. March this earth forward, forward. Thank you.
Ooh, Samaj, oh my goodness. Everything, all of the questions, all of the answers. We can go home now, but we won't, because up next, it's Georgina Marie Guardado.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to read the first poem that was published by poets.org, or the Academy of American Poets, of mine, and I'm representing Lake County, California tonight. Cold gin and a pandemic. A swig of fresh lime squeezed over ice. San Francisco's Junipero gin with a garnish soothes the overwhelm of more bad news and sudden heat. What I learned at home today: the length of estrangement becomes short in comparison to the weight of regret. 100 more days of solitude, a poet's irony. Bare white walls wait with open hearts to catch our sighs. How much I miss my father now that he is dead. Toss back tonic water with an extra kick. Catch the sun warming the side of my face through the glass door into the dining room. Now a reflection of how many years have passed. How the idea of a father became a ghost. How a ghost haunted me into adulthood. How adulthood became a poem always in the works. How poems became home. How hard it is to live inside this one. Thank you.
How hard it is to live inside this one. Thank you, Georgina. Up next, we have Melissa Kwasny.
Hello. Okay. I am just finishing my poet laureateship, a position that I shared with my friend and colleague, M.L. Smoker, in Montana. This is the first laureateship where the position was shared, and it was a great joy to do that with her. I'm going to share, our project was going to a lot of museums in Montana. Montana has many, many small museums, art and historical museums. And we wanted to do a project, an ekphrastic poem project, where we went to each of the museums, gave workshops for area youth in writing ekphrastic poems, and then selected something from the collection and read it and wrote poems in response to it. So I'm going to read one of the first ones I did. This is a painting by Neil Parsons. He's a Blackfeet artist, and this image is from the Hockaday Museum of Art, which is it's a small art museum in Kalispell in the northwest corner of Montana. And the poem is the same as the title of the piece, which you can see is quite stunning. It's called Black Grizzly Bear Robe. In face paint, the bear faces you, each eye tiny, silver, and focused like a star. Its massive shoulders crowd behind it as if waiting for the signal to charge, but more than mere strength is at play here. It's a dangerous animal, surely. The first color you see is blue streaming from its jowls, leaving trails that dilute, grow dimmer as they fall, bleeding down its spoiled regalia. Its forehead is marked with its own totem, a six-legged theriomorph with horns, splayed like an ink blot, or a dissected frog in consort with 8 purple suns around it. But what does it see when it sees you? A frightened person who hangs her head? What does it hear? Nervous jingling of bells before the dance, smell of white threads of mycelium. What if you too could wear your spirit, bejeweled with turquoise and crumpled foil? What if it were the last thing others see, which has its own shape, a tree's crown fanning outward, your hair dyed a sacred green, antlers, or perhaps antennae? Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. What if you too could see your spirit? Wow. Up next, we have Marcus Amaker.
All right, thank you for having me. And I'm gonna do a new poem. I'm hearing an echo. Are you all hearing an echo as well?
A little bit.
Okay. Well, an echo might be good. You can hear the lines twice, right? But yeah, I'm not sure why the echo is happening. I'm unmuted and on video, so we'll see what happens.
Somebody not unmuted.
Oh, Samaj, would you please mute?
Okay. All right. This was a little bit of a snarky reaction to some social media posts. It's a new poem. It's kind of a short one. It's called Step Outside of Your Comfort Zone. Step outside of your comfort zone, or stay inside and notice the way sunlight cuddles your bed. Call it a spell. Pay attention to the sorcery of a family recipe. Remind your tongue of its memory. Your heart is heavy, and that's okay. Change will not happen today. Close your eyes and forfeit your internal revolutionary war. Be a prisoner to your own style of comfort and remember who you are. Water the plants. Lay low in a culture obsessed with rising. You deserve to indulge in self-love. Stay faithful to a memory's grace. That is, in fact, where the magic happens. Oh yeah, and I'm the first poet laureate of Charleston, South Carolina.
#1. Thank you, Marcus. I was about to ask you to throw that in, so I'm glad you remembered.
Yeah,
Up
right.
next, so happy you can join us. Up next, we have Magdalena Gomez.
Myself, there we go. Oh my God, I'm so excited. This is so beautiful. So my name is Magdalena Gomez, and I'm here representing Springfield, Massachusetts. And I wrote this poem thinking about being in conversation with Roque Dalton of Poetry Like Bread is for Everyone. And this is called Unlike Bread. And it is based on my experiences in my community, where 1 in every 3.5 persons live in poverty, as do young people ages 13 to 17, about 31%. When the choice is to eat or read, tend gardens for food, or mine fatigue for verbs, nouns and their subjects will topple, filling the cracks of earthquakes, scatter among the veins and bones of riverbeds. Words lost on privileged paths will soon learn that all cul-de-sacs have their exits, where secrets might assemble unsated tongues, beside gaggles of the silence, together forming verses from hunger. Move people and governments to taste the sand of food deserts. Our children sleep on piles of numbers far from their factory paychecks, where a wire in the bulb retracts, gears make crunching noises, lathes feed perseverations, paper bags are stamped on the bottom with forever forgotten names. Poems must sprout squash blossoms, cucumbers, peppers with their vitamin C. Fruit trees must punctuate prayers in transit to full-bellied gods. Berries flood the cracked skin of childhood's missing songs. The chrysalis must defiantly split, the wind befriend all wings. There will be no verses among fallen trees or flight-weary bees, our unwilling executioners. When poems must compete with hunger, hunger wins. When we the quenched bring loaves and fish, make water of our wine. Giving becomes the miracle from which poems and our children's banners of justice will one day rise. Thank you.
Poems must sprout. Thank you, Magdalena.
Thank you.
Keeping things in Massachusetts, up next, we've got Lloyd Schwartz.
Yay.
Hi, this is great. I'm the poet laureate from the other side of Massachusetts, Somerville, Massachusetts. And I'm going to read a poem called A True Poem. I'm working on a poem that's so true, I can't show it to anyone. I could never show it to anyone because it says exactly what I think, and what I think scares me. Sometimes it pleases me. Usually it brings misery. And this poem says exactly what I think. What I think of myself, what I think of my friends, what I think about my lover. Exactly. Parts of it might please them. Some of it might scare them. Some of it might bring misery. And I don't want to hurt them. I don't want to hurt them. I don't want to hurt anybody. I want everyone to love me. Still, I keep working on it. Why? Why do I keep working on it? Nobody will ever see it. Nobody will ever see it. I keep working on it, even though I can never show it to anybody. I keep working on it, even though someone might get hurt. Thank you.
Thank you, Lloyd. We do love you. Let's
It's working.
it's working. The power of poetry. Let's jump back across the country to Eileen Casaneta.
Thank you, Brian. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm based in San Mateo County in California. My laureateship just ended in June, so I thought it appropriate to read this poem published in poets.org. Legacy. To tell her story, you must know when to put courage in a matchbox and conceal it in a loaf of bread. You must learn how a message betokened deliverance when courage is simply a word someone wrote on a slip of paper, and the sweet scent of bread could no longer sustain you. You must grasp your other hand with what grit remains, growing and unyielding. To tell her story, you must walk in her shoes. If forced out of your leased farmland, don't forget to bring rice if you can pack only what you can carry. And if your mother did not speak inside the bus with the windows covered with brown paper on the way to the barracks, it was only because she was praying that you would not be housed in the horse stall with the manure whitewashed over. And if you were, she was deciding what to do about the smell. To tell her story, you must remember the landscape from behind barbed wire fences. You must gaze at your body and know its history. Look beneath the tender, ridged scars and see the bone protruding out of your right arm and hole the size of a football on your right thigh, wondering how the lights never went out. You must look at the image of your grandmother with the weight of rammed earth against what you survived. To tell her story, you must say a prayer, not of sorrow, but of grace. You must loosen the earth, pick daffodils to the base of the stem. Remember your roots and ordinary days, and the grit under your fingernails, the way your grandmother taught you. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. God, I'm struck by such a nostalgia, and it's so incredible this group has really come together over the last year and met on Zoom many times and just gotten to know each other and gotten to sit with each other. I'm going to share a quick poem and then we'll get into the discussion. As I mentioned, I am serving up until next October 2023 as the Poet Laureate of West Hollywood, which is known as sort of a sanctuary city for folks, particularly from the LGBT community. It's about 40% gay men. And this poem is called Out. The boys stagger, honk, and moan across Robertson, mean as Mary Oliver's wild geese in hot pink booty shorts. They stream neon down this ancestral flight path of faggots while I sit down to write a nature poem. I call on no birds, only swish-wristed wrestlers, pleading heathens set loose, flocking to arts cooperatives, getting yoked at the gym. When you have no wings, only your legs can carry you. When you have no history, you must learn your history from strangers. History does not ask our consent. It pimps us out, puts us on our knees, tests our gag reflex. These are my people, I convince myself. I take some convincing to call this family. This shimmy flick, this good gravel, these bones, these bones, these bones, skeleton. You have so much meat. Soft animal, come in. Here is everything you ran from for so long. Come in. You must be lonely from all that running. Thank you. When our cohort was first assembled and the Academy of American Poets first sort of brought us together on a Zoom during, the lockdowns, and they said, oh, normally we would bring you all out to DC and wine and dine you, but for now, sit in your living rooms, and this is what we can do. One of the things that was mentioned that I thought was really interesting was the idea of the role of Poet Laureate being a lonely role, being often the only person interacting with local government, the only person linking libraries and community centers and schools who's tasked specifically with the job of being a champion for poetry and being an advocate for poetry. And so I want to open things up right now, and thank you for everybody in the chat. Poets, feel free, you can type answers in the chat and we can absolutely answer some of these questions at the end as well. But I want to open things up to the poets right now and just ask, over the course of the last year, it's this sort of life-changing, potentially sum of money that we've gotten to be able to work on these projects, to be able to work on our craft and to work on community organizing. And so I'm just so curious to ask everybody, what surprised you in this year?
Well, yeah, I can answer something. I can answer that. I was definitely surprised at how I actually embraced the idea of poetry being a job. One of my things that I used to always say back before I was making money for poetry was like, you know what, like I don't want this to be a job. Like this is my passion. It's not my job and blah, blah, blah. But I really enjoy the fact that you know, there are organizations and groups out there who really support poets on a financial realm, and knowing that made me really sort of focus in on my work and want to sharpen it and make it better. So I was actually kind of surprised at how much I enjoyed doing a lot of work for this thing that I consider a passion. So that was a pleasant, surprise for me. And that was kind of the first thing that came to mind from that question. So
I think the thing that surprised me most, Somerville is a really is a working class community. The thing that surprised me most was how interested the people in this community who weren't poets. There are a lot of poets in Somerville, but the people who weren't poets were all really interested in poetry and interested in talking about poetry, interested in reading poetry, some of them interested in writing poetry. I was dealing with high school kids and senior citizens, but also I have a monthly meeting called Let's Talk About a Poem. And there, I think most of the people are not poets, but they're so interested and so smart and articulate and love, oh, you know, I haven't done this since I was in high school or in college. And that there's still this kind of passion about poetry, even though it's been repressed for sometimes many years. That was a surprise.
And make sure you unmute for us, Samaj. There you go.
Thank you. I was surprised by the local media. They were so supportive and they joined in at every turn to publicize the poetry, the projects, what I was doing for the community. They really were partners. And that surprised me. The local and the state media, they just got behind it because it was just beautiful. All the articles and the interviews, and they really helped me to communicate what a poet laureate was, how I can serve you, and what am I doing, and how we can all help, what poetry can do. It was fabulous. That was so surprising to me.
Oh, I love that answer. I think there's such a hunger for good news, right? That to be someone whose role, you know, not that poetry is happy necessarily, but someone whose role is at least not, you know, destroying things. Go ahead, Georgina.
Sure. I think the most surprising thing was that I was awarded this fellowship. There's so many wonderful poets laureate across the country. So I think I've been surprised by my own personal journey in terms of accepting that this is something I deserve as a poet. And I think at some point, some of us might feel the same. But also surprised that more people didn't know what a poet laureate is or that they still existed in this time. And also there's so many people, especially in my community, who didn't realize how accessible poetry is. Maybe they had kind of an understanding that all poetry is like Shakespeare or Walt Whitman, and it's not as accessible as it is today. So being able to bring all different types of contemporary poetry to my community it's been a joy, and it's been a surprise to see kind of how it's been flourishing and changing the minds of people who now read poetry.
Thank you, Georgina. For me, I've been surprised by the attention the fellowship received from both literary and non-literary circles. On the one hand, I know it's kind of sad that to need that kind of validation, but on the other hand, it sort of gave the message that yes, poets are being compensated for their time and labor, and yes, our work as poets laureate can also shape economic outcomes. But even with this fellowship, an arts nonprofit manager told me that poetry as an industry or activity does not contribute financially to the urban economy. So I personally would well, I'm also very surprised by the amount of support we got from the Academy of American Poets and from each other. And I would like to follow up on our plan of organizing ourselves into a collective, and more on that later.
Go ahead, Magdalena.
So what I wanted to say was, what really surprised me was how few people knew what a poet laureate was. That was one thing. The fact that some people actually had trouble saying the words and, you know, had no previous understanding of what a poet laureate was. And this was among educated people. This was among people who have perhaps been schooled, you know, but not necessarily educated. Our schools do sometimes fail our children. In fact, too often. But what did surprise me was the Department of Health and Human Services making the connection between poetry and celebration of life and mourning in times of COVID. And they asked me to write or to present poems for 2 events. One was celebrating those who had been supportive of the community during COVID. And the other one was for 500 families who had lost, or 500 people who had died of COVID and 500 families who had lost someone. And it touched me so much that I couldn't just do something, you know, that I had done before. I created new work for both events. And it was beautiful to see the response to that, to understand the humanity of poetry. I took risks because people that were being lauded were pretty much medical people. And I took it from the scalpel to the mop and talked about all of the people that were part of the healing of our community and the taking care of our community. And I wasn't sure what response I would get to that, you know, and it was mixed. There were people that were uncomfortable with that, with, you know, seeing the heroism of people who have to clean up after us in hospitals. I think to me that is as important as the surgeon. It's a different kind of important. But in the end, people really responded. And it meant a great deal to me. As you can see, I'm a little tongue-tied. It's not just the brain injury, but it's also the memory of what it felt like to read those pieces, one inside of City Hall and one on the steps of City Hall with 500 bags with candles in them. You know, those, not the kind that'll burn, but, you know, just to see those bags on the steps representing the dead and have them behind me as I read. And it was extraordinary. It made me, it's like, okay, it's okay that you don't know what a poet laureate is. You understand that poetry unites us. Poetry is blood flowing between us. So thank you so much. And thank you all for your kind patience.
Ryan, someone in the chat wanted to know what a poet laureate was.
What a good question.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I've got a little bit from the chat that I think we can move into. And of course, folks, feel free to jump in. I'm reminded, Magdalena, I don't know if I've shared this story with you. I got a call from someone with the Associated Press, and they said, I'm writing a story. We're approaching 1 million COVID deaths in the United States. And we've talked to doctors, and we've talked to nurses, we've talked to everyone we could possibly think of about this topic over the last 2 years. And my editor said, well, why don't you talk to some poets? And I'm just struck in what you said by that resonance that, you know, when you've exhausted the experts, right? When you've run out of people to talk to, who do you call? You call a poet. But yeah, what a poet laureate does, I think, is different. And that's one of the things that's been fascinating to me to see between each of our roles. Everything from the duties, what's expected of each of us with the places that we're serving, to, you know, the budgets of the places that we're serving for us. For some places, it's entirely a voluntary role. Some places will have a small stipend. I think in all cases, the Academy funding has really come in to bridge that and make it something that can be more like a job rather than something that's a little bit more of a community service position. And it ranges, I think, everything from readings to what we call occasional poems, which are poems for special events or commemorative events, to doing more literary organizing. So putting together panels, putting together group discussions. And then each of us also for the Academy had to propose a project. And so had to propose a larger overarching thing that we're doing. So for instance, and this is, Anastasia, I love that you're with the Sims Library of Poetry. This is a little bit of my answer, is I've been running a weekly open mic every Tuesday night at Mickey's, which is one of the largest and oldest gay bars in West Hollywood, and creating a space for people to come and share their stories and share their poems before the Go-Go Boys and the, you know, house music starts later on in the evening. But yeah, I think each of us has ended up doing stuff that's really different. And I wonder if that's something that maybe folks want to get into, maybe not everybody, but if a couple of folks want to share a little bit about their projects and maybe even how the projects have evolved since what you first pitched to what you wound up doing. Did anyone have radical changes in what they wanted to do? Go ahead and unmute, Samaj.
Thank you. I'd like to just mention Dear Poet. That experience changed my life. It changed me completely. I submitted a poem, Black Dandelion. That'll be the second poem I decided to read. I was changing around what I'm doing here. And when I received the letters from the students that heard Black Dandelion, I was actually sobbing, and I had to take a break to get through the letters. These are middle and high school students, and they were talking about genocide, and they were talking about historical genocide of their great grandparents. One letter was talking about disabilities, the challenge to his little brother. He's a Black Dandelion because he's bullied. And there was this convergent identity with the poem. And there were people from all Asian, Armenian, African-American, Caucasian, all across the board, because they identified themselves, and they all identified with this dandelion. As a result, I can't leave that poem. It has to go into the voice of the Black Dandelion. So now this is a new project that's going to be launched this fall to give voice, vocalize the letters. The Black Dandelion will continue. That poem will go out to Michigan school teachers, and then they will have letters, and then we will vocalize it. We'll have a program where youth actors will read the letters. And so it's just changed everything, my perspective, how far-reaching this can be. With my poem, I hadn't really read my own work. They made me pay attention to what I'm reading, to what I'm writing. I mean, I read it, but you know, I don't necessarily study my own work. I should say that. And these youth, these young people did, and they brought it to me in such a huge global way. And I really appreciated that. So now it's a big project.
I can speak to my project. So I live in a very rural community in Lake County, California. For anyone who's familiar with it, it's small, we're very spread out. There are a lot of unincorporated areas as well. So it's not always easy for someone to get to the library, or some poetry readings might be held more on one side of the lake, and due to transportation, folks can't always get here. So my idea was to bring poetry to the people all around the lake, making it accessible, not just in terms of being able to read poetry, but physically being able to, locate it. So I collaborated with a local woodworker, and we built poetry box displays and also little poetry libraries that went up all around the county in different locations. Originally, my plan was to include poetry murals as well. That wasn't so popular, actually. Most people really love the boxes and the little libraries. So I just stuck with that and did more of those instead of the murals. And it's just been really great. There's so many different businesses also that ended up being interested in this and collaborating with me. So you'll see these displays like down Main Street in Kelseyville, which is a cute little quaint town, or at a random restaurant or someone's home. And it's really kind of focused on areas where folks may not be able to necessarily get to, but also popular areas where we also, may not expect people to stop and read a poem. And it's really cool to actually see them doing that.
Yeah, I absolutely loved reading and hearing about all of the projects that you have all done. Just because I think that it's really important for people to realize just how flexible this art form is and how malleable it is, and it can be put in a lot of different places to present the written word to other people. So I'll talk about my project really quickly. I did a book of student work. It's called Colors Wash Over Me, and it ended up being 250 pages. So it was a whole bunch of poets and we went into schools and did workshops, and then I published their work in that book. And we did a book release party for it and everything. So it's important to me just for students to know that their voices matter, to give them an opportunity to be published for the first time, to sort of break this wall of, oh, you have to have an MFA or you have to do this or that, to be able to be in a book. So that was important to me, because every classroom I go to, students, they write, so they might not be as skilled as a lot of us are, because we have age now to work on all that stuff. But just for them, the ability to be able to write is enough, and that's what I keep telling them. So that was a big deal for me to be able to publish their work in that book, and the response, like just the way that they reacted to the book was enough, for me. It was just really cool just to see how excited they were to see their name in print, because I definitely remember that moment, and I haven't stopped since,
So
yeah.
I did a similar project, and this is the book that just came out, and there were, I think, certainly none of the students had ever been published before. Some of the students had never written poems before, and some of them had never written in English before. And how thrilling that was for them.
Proof of, they call it in sociology, social mattering, which I think is really, really beautiful. I know Melissa had started to say something, and then Magdalena wanted to speak after that. So it's Melissa and then Magdalena.
Just quickly, I wanted to make the point that we all have amazingly time-consuming and wonderful projects that each person did. But in addition to that, I wanted to say that the Academy also gives these fellowships so that we can have a little bit of leeway to write our own work. And one thing that I saw happen, my colleague, Mandy Smoker, who has a full-time job, who has a 9-year-old child, who is busy, had time to do a small residency, had time to write. She wrote a young adult graphic novel about a Lakota girl and her quest to come back to her culture, an urban girl that's now published. And there's so many things like what Samaj said about the letters to a young poet, that the Academy, in addition to our projects, asks us if we want to participate in. And that was one of the that was a very moving thing for me too, reading the letters and writing these letters back to students all over the country. And so there are lots of things that you do besides the projects itself. It's a very rich experience.
Magdalena, go ahead.
Thank you, Brian. When I look at grants, a lot of times it says how many numbers, as opposed to how many did you reach, as opposed to participants. What is the ripple effect of the work? And I got to see so much ripple effect in this. I worked with a group of intergenerational women who had not read poetry on camera before. Some had never written before. And the Academy took that video and posted it on their site. So the women were thrilled beyond thrilled. One of them is a high school teacher. So everything that she learned is being passed on now to her students. Her students got to see her read her work in both Spanish and English. And I worked also with the Springfield libraries and with the Hispanic library. That's the name, is the Hispanic library, is in Union Station. And talk about a library for and by the people. You can get a key to that library if you need to use a computer. That is a library in and of itself that was started as a nonprofit. And working there was fabulous because I worked with vets, and I worked with the man who started the project, who hadn't written a poem since the 70s and wrote one. And it was just the excitement of what happened afterwards was they started booking poets there at the library at Union Stations. So what happened was that ripple effect was on Amherst Media, which is cable access. So 7,000 families had access to it in the Amherst area alone. And so I think it's important to acknowledge, and as Melissa said, we've done our own work, we've done our creative work, we finally got paid to do it. It was just so nice. And every single thing that each of us does, Samaj, what you're doing with Dandelion, ripple effect. Okay, so maybe you had, I don't care if you had 2 participants, look what you're going to do now. You're going to reach probably thousands of people. And I think that's what I want institutions and funders to remember, that it isn't the number of participants, but it's the width, the breadth, and the continuity of the reach. So thank you for that. Thank you for the time.
Go ahead. I know Eileen had raised her hand, and then Lloyd.
Yeah, so my project centered youth, climate change, and eco-poetry. We launched several workshops, and we chose a few of the collaborative poems and created short films. I think the main takeaway from my project would be that it gave birth to other projects like a makerspace lab, or even the first Eco Poetry Award in our county. So it's mostly, I don't know that my work changed the world, but I would think that it changed the world of some of the high school students I worked with.
Mhm.
We are mostly urban and county poets, but Melissa was a state poet laureate, and I was curious about how much traveling Melissa, how much traveling did you have to do? Montana is a big state.
We did a lot of traveling. Montana, I mean, some of these museums were 3-hour drives, you know, from one place to another, but we did it together and we had a great time doing it. So traveling with a friend.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I know that we could chat and we will chat for many more hours about all of this. I know there are a couple of questions that we didn't get to that I just want to sort of acknowledge questions about whether there will be write-ups on this impact and sort of what's next. Thank you for that call. Let me see what I can organize and get back to you, and hopefully we can send something out. Also, just a lot of questions on how to get more involved and people wanting to sort of get into poetry, and would absolutely encourage you, feel free to reach out to me via social media or email, and I'm sure any of these poets as well would be happy to kind of give some pointers and some guidance. But for now, I want to jump back into our readings to close us out. I've been told by Jose, I've had the official go ahead that we can go a little bit over the hour. But we're gonna go again in the same order as before. So I'll pass things back to Samaj.
All right, thank you so much. Black Dandelion, age 4. Witnessed my first mow down. Twinkling ground stars cut by murderous lawnmower, feeling the blade. I fell, curled like a snail in grief. 12 full moons folded into spring. Perennial promises prevailed. Bees. Oh, the bees celebrated return of dandelions in a skirt of twirling yellow bliss. Flowering bouffant mirrored my spiky little afro. Jagged edged lion's tooth leaves paid tribute to my snaggletooth smile. Me and my freedom fighting flowers frolicked to survive. The scissoring, updigging, poisoning. Warning signs hovered like low-hanging clouds. No blooming allowed. Blossoms will be prosecuted. These brave plants, they grew just for me. Grew in spite of a society that favored a monochromatic landscape. 1965. Mr. Brother Malcolm X was assassinated. Big word for a pre-kindergartner. I was convinced he must have been a dandelion. Reverend King too, and the Johnson boy who lived one turn down the street that way. The Johnson boy was shot by the police for growing in a monochromatic landscape. Training wheels off, bike riding across insecure cement. I pedaled the bumpy path, waving solidarity to each surviving sunburst noggin, each fulfilling the promise to ornament lawns and flourish souls with lemon drop hope. Dandelions bear the art of endurance and escape, transforming into pearl puffs, floating with ephemeral intention, carrying the spirit of the weed. 13 full moons faded into July. I am a proud weed. Yes, I declared that shocking proclamation standing in the pulpit on Youth Sunday, Vernon Chapel AME Church. I added to my speech on David and Goliath my impromptu dandelion dogma. We are Black dandelions who will never be destroyed. We grow the power of goodness for generations into the future. I yet remember the hat-framed faces of the pious, the amused, and the mortified. Thank you.
All right. Up next is Georgina.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. You inspired me to also read my Dear Poet poem. So I'm going to read this poem. And I just want to say quickly, it's really interesting that this poem really is about a bird. It's a literal poem about an experience I had. But many students who wrote to me about this poem felt like the bird was their grandmother, which is really interesting because my own grandmother passed away a couple of years ago. So eye on the sparrow. I woke to rapid flapping, the air cold, the time unknown, the dog's paws tapping on chill hardwood floor, sudden commotion. Jumping to corral what was assumed to be an animal fight, I find a California townie in my dining room. Frantic, frightened, brisk movement in her wings, making the room that much more frigid. I stammer to her. Follow her room to room as she attempts to fly her way out of walls until she finally calms, allowing me to cup her into my hands. We sit together outside on a frosty concrete step, my bare feet settling on top of wet fall leaves, gathering the taste of morning in my mouth, the scent of rain and dirt. She catches her breath. My thumb softly wrapped around her chest, feeling her heart rate regulating, her eyes opening, her fear receding. Leaves rustle, wind and traffic move along while she and I watch each other in a place where time moves slower than the rest of the world. Her eyelids the color of peach and terracotta, her body the rusty hue of autumn, her eyes the same shade as mine, dark as loam. I flatten my hand, she doesn't move. We sit together for what seems like hours, what seems like fate when safety is reciprocated. 10 minutes later, she flies, stops on a dog-eared picket and looks back. The dog quietly watches me, how I love and let go all at once. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgina. Melissa's up next.
This is a mural. It's actually just part of a mural in a rotunda at the Museum of the Plain Indian in Browning, Montana. And this was painted by Victor Papillon in the early 1940s. Blue horses, it's called. Blue horses are gray, wearing an overcoat of frost, like a swan's wing against an overcast sky. Roan or dapple, they are a marquee species amidst the brown herd, the sorrel, bay, and Appaloosa. High on the walls of the museum rotunda, the buffalo too are circling. Among them, the people, younger than they will ever be again, their deer skins soft and carefully beaded. They tell us a story of when snow came in winter, when rain turned the summer meadows green. The Blackfeet artist used a technique called fresco seco, 60 years after the buffalo were gone, 30 million hunted down to a few hundred. His dry pigments, slaked with lime, are now part of the plaster wall, just as the red ochre in ancient pictographs has bound with limestone. 99 degrees on the Siberian tundra now, thousands of reindeer dead as anthrax releases from the melting permafrost. Earth remembering the last bout of it. In the painter's conception of his ancestors, only 1 or 2 generations passed. The weather is perfect, plants free of disease. Picture yourself when you were most joyful, a meditation begins. As if you were still there. Try to see through those eyes.
Thank you, Melissa. Up next is Marcus.
I too am going to read my Dear Poet poem. That was a really wonderful experience for me as well. This is called Give Yourself Some Flowers. And in the beginning, God gave your body a checklist. Keep your heart on beat and your lungs dancing with oxygen, not passive to air. Make sure the path of your blood slows down for checkpoints and avoids bumps in the road. Train your nerves to keep a balanced pace and stay within the lines of steady flow. Push forward without putting too much pressure on movement. Remember, return to water when your spirit and its frame are in drought. Treat your body like a well-rounded planet built for all seasons, or pretend you are an adaptable star. Float in the black and stay there if you need to. Save some light for yourself. In other words, rest like the sun does. Schedule some time to stay out of sight when too many people praise warm energy. Keep in mind all of these things when depression tells you nothing is working. Keep in mind all of these things when it tells you there is no invisible force connecting us, when your veins are stopped by blood clots, when your bones are dry and the water is too quick to boil. Keep in mind all of these things when it tells you that the soul is like the body, made to be broken, open to deterioration and doubt. Yes, keep in mind all of these things. And remember, even when it seems like the clock isn't ticking, you were made perfectly for this moment in time. Thank you. It was also starring my cat, Mr. Wu.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Up next is Magdalena.
Oh, Marcus, that was so healing and just what I needed to hear. I've been carrying so many struggles and burdens, and I need my time in that blackness. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that.
It was such a gift. Thank you. And this moment, I needed it so much. Thank you, Academy and Mellon Foundation, because I was able to finish my autobiography for the first 19 years of my life. I consider it a study in the metaphysics of my imagination. And it's prose, poetry, dreams, and yet tells the story that can be followed despite all the disparate elements. And this is a piece about one of my library boyfriends, Federico Garcia Lorca. And if it goes from prose into poem. I went into my room to speak with the ghost of Federico Garcia Lorca about his love for Andalusia, that beautiful genius whose work brought me closer to Papi's people than Papi ever dared, my literary hero in what he wrote and how he lived. His remains were never found. I have found them over and over in my dreams, hidden within a steeple where a rooster's crow has replaced the bells. He is a fistful of gold dust, a bow tie, a bloody quill. I hear a step on a loose board. I turn, he kisses my mouth, and I always wake up before finding my tongue. Before I can swear it's really him. Dear Federico, men following orders ended your flesh in fields of fallen bluebirds who, like you, swallowed great evil to save the few, so the people might believe that good is possible. May it give you solace to know you saved this life, your hand on mine, holding the knife that had vowed to bleed out the sadness, the needle to suture light into flesh, making beauty of scars, your lessons to gut my worthless faith in humanity, infuse my bones with the sea for the suckling of forgotten fish. You, Federico, are my faith. What do I care that you love men? I am neither man nor woman. You could love me. As these words arrive, I find courage to step beyond dreams. You, Federico, you, your courage, my black quill of a dawn that rewrites me as ululations rise from these fingers, now tongues. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Magdalena. Up next, we have Lloyd.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. This is a short dialogue called 6 Words. Yes, no, maybe, sometimes, always, never. Never? Yes. Always? No. Sometimes? Maybe, maybe never sometimes. Yes, no, always, always maybe. No, never yes. Sometimes, sometimes always yes. Maybe never. No, no, sometimes. Never. Always? Maybe. Yes. Yes, no, maybe, sometimes, always, never.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Thanks.
Up next is Eileen.
Thanks, Brian. I also would like to share my Dear Poet poem, but I'd like to share the version that was read by the U.S. Consulate General in Shanghai.
There are no kings in America. We are not that kind of country. We are sanctuary for the hungry, the homeless, the huddled, held together by an idea our immigrant fathers believed in.
Rendered, it meant independence. Pursued, it kindled war, ordnance, a fighting chance.
40,000 musket balls by themselves did not shape the boundaries on which we map our days.
To draw our borders, we needed more than fire cakes.
More than pound of meat with bone and gristle, or saltfish and a gill of peas.
We needed the faith and grit of people who were not yet Americans.
To be an American is to recognize the sacrifice of the widow and the orphan.
It is to understand the weft of tent cities expecting caravans, and the half of a child in a can not meant for children, or sitting before a judge awaiting judgment.
What do we say to the native lands we now inhabit? What do we say to our immigrant fathers who held certain truths to be self-evident?
Do we still pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor?
There are no kings in America. Only gilded men we can topple again and again. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. I hadn't seen that before. Oh my goodness. You've all inspired me to share my Dear Poet poem as well. This one is called Heirloom. And after I share this, I'll share the Exquisite Corpse game that we all played together. An Exquisite Corpse is a game that was created by the Surrealists in which each poet only sees the stanza before the one that they're writing. And so we pass this poem around the country to create it. That's the next one that you'll see. But first, this is Heirloom. Dad always grew tomatoes. They were his pride and joy. So when the lady outside Home Depot offered me a box and said, "Do you have a garden?" I didn't say no, though I should have. I said, "We have a theater." And somehow that was just as good. It grows like a weed in Hollywood, in the cracks between film and industry. It was a grease monkey's garage, then a shooting range, but only now can we call the people who run it clowns. We put the tomatoes out on the air conditioning supply unit to try to add some poetry to that phrase. Today is tomatoes in the parking lot. Tomorrow is white roof, filtered water, solar panels, cycle rack, urban garden, green building, public plaza, artist's village, to build a cultural heritage for the city I once heard described as hell's parking lot. Tomato by tomato, because nobody dreams as hard as poets, and nobody works as hard as clowns. Thank you. And now I am so pleased to present the world premiere of our Exquisite Corpse poetry video. It'll be up on the Academy of American Poets site and in their newsletter shortly. But you all are getting a sneak peek. This is the first time we've shared it with folks beyond this cohort. You'll see all 8 of the poets who were here today represented in this video alongside 5 others who were in our cohort with us. And the central question behind this video that we were all trying to answer poetically, one after the other, is what is a poet laureate? What is the role of one? So without further ado, here is our laureate's collaborative poem. Always a shift in definition. Otter, author into community worker. Not we are here to hear your voice, but you are here to give us voice. We seem to have mislaid it on the way to society. Did you bring a flashlight? Call it impropriety. We aim to misbehave, to remind you all your money's no remedy for a grave.
A poet laureate is a servant's heart on a stark canvas of parchment. The role is honey in the mouth and bitter in the belly. We are an unfolding scroll of judgment pronounced in sacred tones.
Laureate of faith found her, ancient stone under the moon, without breath, wind abandoned. In her core, fossilized poems recall words hemorrhaging forced.
I was taught, heart with mind speaks truth. Dark bright, bright dark, and the infinite sheen of the in-between. Who am I? Are you to lift our voice? With calloused hands and histories, we carry each other. We honor our dead. We gather and plant the seeds, hoping to bend time to a softer curve.
Copper leaves sit upon a neighboring tin roof, and I can't help but believe these too are a lesson in speaking of soothe. Creation to nature, to observation, to writing it down, to a poem it becomes. The writer's blood filling with warmth to have created and continued, to have lived with bronze sights on a frozen morning.
Or in populous cities, the varied carols, where in poems, singing voices speak, speaking voices sing.
I was taught to gather only what belonged to me, to never pick wildflowers, but instead commit to memory the shape and sound of what they shelter. Painted lady, bumblebee. When I say speak poetry, I mean know the language of wild and fragile things. Speak of flight and firelight, how to measure a wingspan, a lifespan, A split second that changes everything. Carry each other, the poet says. This matters more than anything.
To not be wind weary, but to let the air guide you.
To make sacred our sadness, unveiled into triumphs of story.
This unfolding, this cultural conjuring, this exercise in ritual. The poet does not write, the poet sings.
The poet whose right to song underrings and overhears, conjures covens, translates conjugation, folds into the public soil, rocks out again.
Smooth and jagged crumbs of earth, planted and strewn, surprising the toes of giants, leveling giants to ground level truths. Poets reclined into the landscape, clapping dirt and ink from their hands.
Ridding themselves of illusions and excess. Red clay makes fertile soil for growing imaginations and generations. Poets tend society's gardens, nurturing seeds, plucking weeds.
Oh, hooray. Thank you all so much. Thank you to the LA County Library for having us and hosting us and bringing us all together in this space. I'll pass it back over to you, and so wonderful cohort to see your faces and hear your work again.
Thank you so much, Mara. So I'm at a loss for words. Like I usually have something witty to say, but thank you. I mean, your work showed the scope of what poetry can be and can encompass. I'm truly at a loss for words, and I'm sure most of our attendees are on that same level with me. So thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to host you and hold on this presentation. Okay, sorry, but I'll just do my usual wrap up.
And I think I'm still spotlighted, Jose, if you want to claim your spotlight back.
I think I have us all in gallery view, so I think we could see all 8 of us.
And Jose, I have to tell you, I'm the one who lost words tonight, not you. I win.
But thank you again so much, everybody, for joining us. If you have any ideas of what kind of programs you'd like to see LA County Library present, please let me know. I will follow up with an email tomorrow late with an edited version of this video, and it will be up on our YouTube page. If you're interested in participating in any more of our upcoming programs, please visit lacountylibrary.org/virtual program and follow us on all the socials at LA County Library. And I will go on mute and let everybody say goodbye before we end tonight's program. Thank you once again, everybody. It was a true pleasure and an honor to host you all tonight.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you to the library. Thank you all.
Thank you. What an honor to be part of this group. And thank you, Jose. And thank you, Brian, for putting this all together.